Right, lipids. This is the next class of biochemical molecules that I want to talk about. We did carbohydrates yesterday, and again, if you're just watching this, you should watch the video by Hank Green, Crash Course in Biochemistry. It's actually in the series number 3, and it talks about how it's, I think the title is You Are What You Eat. It's the first one that comes up in a search, but I think it's the third one in the actual series. And this time we watched about lipids, and it talks about what makes something a lipid. A lipid is basically a fat or an oil. Fat is a solid lipid at room temperature. Oils are liquids at room temperature. And cholesterol, we're going to talk about that. So I have a little article for you to read at the end. I want you to do that at the end of this period. Okay, and it'll be a question on a test like there was in the last one. All right, fats and oils contain, and this is how they're made chemically, 3 fatty acids bonded to glycerol. 3, that's why they're called triglycerides. You may have heard that word, triglycerides. Okay? A lot of your parents, basically, or grandparents, keep track of their triglyceride levels. They have tests all the time to track their cholesterol. All right? HDL, LDL, you ever hear of that? Yeah. And maybe some of your parents were even on drugs. This is why well, not that kind of drugs. They're different. If we were in Berwick, so I'm sure some of your parents are on drugs, but some of your parents are maybe on what are called statins that lower your levels of cholesterol, bad cholesterol. And we'll talk about that because I'm actually going to read about that. This article is a really neat article I found just recently. It's kind of like part of my life is teaching is trying to find things that everybody thinks are true and really aren't. Kind of like a Mythbusters class, and that's what AP Chem, the second class you take here, is if you ever do take it, is like that. At the end of every unit, I do a myth-busting thing where we talk about stuff that you all thought you knew. All right, you thought you knew everything about, and it turns out that everything you thought was wrong. And I started doing this. Not everything, but a lot of the stuff you thought was wrong. I started doing this when I started realizing how many things I was completely misinformed on. Even going to the most common one today with global warming. When I grew up, and people debate about this, or whether it was really a big deal. When I grew up, I was worried about global cooling. I remember reading it in my weekly readers, and then it became global warming. When I grew up, I was told, eat margarine, and so I had my kids eat margarine because margarine's better for you. And then they found out margarine's got trans fats in it, and it's way worse for you than butter. And when I grew up, you were told that the TV screens and the magnetic fields from power lines were going to cause cancer, and peanut butter was going to cause cancer, and everything was going to cause cancer. And it turned out that wine's good for you, and peanut butter is not going to kill you, and beer is not going to kill you, and magnetic fields, now we wear magnets, and we were afraid of them. I mean, everything I learned when I was a kid is exactly the opposite now if it came to science. It's amazing. So I try to find these things. I look them up. And cholesterol is another one. The most recent studies seem to show, and some of your parents may want to read this, the most recent studies seem to show something, I just put it out there, I'm recording, seem to show that a lot of the fear we had about cholesterol is really kind of overblown. And you can read it on your own, and we'll talk about it later. All right, so anyway, let's get back to the actual chemistry of this. All right, you have this all draw, you don't have to draw this in here. This is a glycerol molecule. I want to talk a little bit about this, because you're going to learn, again, speaking ahead to Chem 2, we're going to have a whole thing on organic. I want to kind of compare this, because it's kind of fun to do this. This guy, any alcohol looks like this. It's just an R group, some number of carbons, and then an OH at the end. We're going to add to him fatty acids. What do acids always have at the end of them? Or at the beginning of them? What do acids always have? H's, like HCl, right? It would be an acid, H2SO4. Turns out that organic acids also have an H, but they also have carbon compounds after it. It's kind of weird because it looks like this, C-O on O, OH, and the H here is going to act like that H there. What do we know in this year that always has OHs in it? What do we call those things? Bases. And, these guys are an acid. Well, that's what this basically is. This is an acid-base reaction at the organic level. It's actually going to form something that's called an ester. This is something we will cover in Chem 2. Ester reactions. We will make esters. We will do a lot of that in Chem 2. But it's the same as salt. If you take an alcohol and a carboxylic acid, the water gets split off, that H and that OH, And these guys get joined together to make what you would call a salt in inorganic, but is really an ester in this class, when we get to Chem 2. Either way, that's what's happening when you take your alcohol, your glycerol, and you add to him, you have the same picture over there, the carboxylic acid, this H here, and this OH here, go off and make, you're going to see over here, water, right? And it links this guy up here. And you're going to get 3 of them, actually, linked like that. And if it's a saturated fat, if that means all, look at these guys, no double bonds, all single bonds. Unsaturated fat has double bonds in it, all right? So that's the only difference between saturated and unsaturated fats. All right, you get an ester. All right, the ester, in this case, being fat, lipid. A lipid is this guy combined with 3 fatty acids. And you also get water. Oops, water. And that's basically, and I'm going to ask you questions in the test. I'll have pictures. These, I know it's a pretty crappy graphic, but, basically just showing you, you should know what these guys look like. You'll have to know what the nucleic acid looks like, what the carbohydrates look like, their sugars, and what lipids look like. And I will have worksheets that also practice this a little bit too. Okay, good enough. Now, let's get to some more stuff about what the actual function of these lipids is. Most of us think fat is just there to make us fat, to make us look bad. And we try our best to get rid of it. You have no idea how much you need fat. Fat is absolutely necessary to your existence. Even cholesterol. You don't realize that, but it is. First function, obviously, you think of is that we can burn it for energy, and you can. Okay? We can absolutely break down lipids and get energy from them. And we don't do that until we've used up all the sugar in our bloodstream and the glycogen too. But eventually I can burn some fat. It's hard. I know as I get older it's even harder. All right? It's easy to put on weight. All you got to do is eat. But it's hard to get rid of it because you've got to basically not eat and exercise to get rid of all that sugar that's in your bloodstream and be drawn on that fat. It's not easy to do. All right, so there's energy. That's one thing. There's hormones. And that's another. That's a biggie. You don't realize this, but all testosterone, estrogen, these are all made from fats. They're used in the production of hormones. And he mentioned that in his thing, too, in his little video clip. So we need fats so you can have sex. And we need fats so you can have energy. All right, we also need fats to make our cell membranes. Every single cell in your body has a cell membrane. And that membrane is a phospholipid bilayer of them that surrounds the cytoplasm and basically keeps everything together. And that's really important. The cell membranes help regulate what goes in and out of the cell, the permeability of the cell. You want some things in, and you want other things to get out. You want things that it's making to be able to be produced and get out into the bloodstream or into the fluids or whatever. And you want other things to be able to get into that cell to make it, allow it to make those things. So your cell membrane, which kind of looks like this, it has this phospholipid layer, which you can see, those tails, and the phosphate is the polar group, so it's attracted to the water, and the non-polar groups attract to each other. And inside that membrane, there are channels, there are ways to get through, there are proteins, there are even carbohydrate chains, and look at this, cholesterol. It's in there, and it has functions. It actually has another function we're going to talk about right now. And all that picture's on your paper too. Cholesterol. It is a lipid that is essential. And this is the thing. We are so used, like cholesterol, Hitler, bad. It must be bad. All right. We all have this fear of these things, just like we have of fats and lipids too. Can't eat fats. You're going to get fat if you eat a lot of fat. It's not really true. You don't really get fatter from eating fats. I mean, obviously, if you ate a lot of fat, you would get. But it's not like it itself is going to make it so incredibly unhealthy. And we've been told, the old food pyramid was so wrong. We were told to eat all these carbohydrates, which really does make you fat. And it's funny. We've been told all these things. I should have brought up earlier about how reason I'd like to do a little myth busting. There's another thing. If you look at the old food pyramid, that biggest area was the cereals and grains and starch and all that stuff. And now we know if you ate like the food pyramid, that's why we look like we do. That's why Americans are so fat, because that does get converted, and you do put on a lot of weight from that. All right, so cholesterol is very important. It's used in the production of steroid hormones, and not the kind you're going to take in football team, Anthony. Yeah. You're not talking about juice in here. The steroids that you have naturally in your body, like the sex hormones, like testosterone, estrogen. Like Tyler's got a lot of estrogen.
His T counts pretty low.
Yeah, he's got low T. That's the new commercial, right? How about that? Those new commercials. I'm afraid of that. I mean, as you get older, your testosterone naturally drops. But I mean, I don't care. I don't really like the idea of putting synthetic hormones into my body. It's just, I mean, why would you do that? Same thing with, like, if you're football. I'm just kidding about Anthony. But if you're a football player, why would you do that? I mean, it just seems to be, I don't know.
Because you don't want to have kids and you're trying to get some sort of cancer.
I guess that's a good point. Yeah, you want to be sterile, and you want to die young. That's pretty much the reason to do it. So anyway, it's really an important function. Cholesterol travels through the bloodstream, and it's carried by these packages called lipoproteins, HDL and LDL. You've heard of those. I bet your parents have. I bet they have them checked all the time. I'm going to give you the numbers down here in a little bit of what's considered high and low cholesterol. I bet your parents could tell you what their last cholesterol reading is. I bet they're really worried about it. And the funny thing is, when you read this article, you'll be surprised to find that a lot of that stuff turns out to be not that really important. Now, there are people who obviously have to take certain drugs to keep those levels down. And I'm no doctor, so don't listen to me anyway. But I just found this article interesting how, yet again, something we were told and took for granted all of our life, cholesterol bad, turns out to be not quite as bad as we thought. Now, there is a difference between LDL and HDL, and I want to give you the party line on this, okay? I want to tell you the good one and the bad one, at least what they call that. LDL is the bad guy. He's the one that's supposed to be the bad cholesterol. Because what he does is he basically transports cholesterol into the artery wall, okay? Which, you know, it's not for no reason. But if you do it too much, what happens is plaque builds up, okay? And that plaque in the wall builds up. If it builds up enough and it blocks the artery, what do we call that? A heart attack, absolutely. Blocks an artery going to the heart, that's a heart attack. What if it builds up enough and then a piece of that breaks off and goes to your brain and blocks an artery? It's a stroke, yeah. Either a stroke or what they now call a brain attack. Believe it or not, yeah, I know. But yeah.
Is that more politically correct?
Yeah, exactly. You got to wonder why. So both of those things.
Having a brain attack.
Yeah, I know.
People just laugh at you. Nobody's going to take you seriously.
Right. I'm having a stroke. All right, that's serious. But I'm having a brain attack.
Like,
what is this, a cartoon? It's like Joe versus the volcano.
Penny jar.
Brain cloud. What?
Penny jar.
Yeah, it's over there. You can go get it. There's some in it, but not many. We have a very, very ungenerous class. So I put some in.
You got carrots?
No, I need duct tape first.
All right. So the LDL is considered to be the bad cholesterol because it transports the cholesterol into the arteries wall, and therefore, if it builds up in there enough, you can get problems. Okay. And the HCl. And that's why you're always looking at your levels, okay? If you have a high LDL and a low HDL, they're worried. But if you have a high HDL and a low LDL, they're not really that worried. Or even if the two are, you know, the numbers are, you know, I'm not a doctor again. I'm going to show you some of the stuff on here. And there are ways you can increase or decrease those naturally. And if it's not good enough, then they can put you on things called statins. But you're going to read about that also in the article too. So the HDL, that stuff is considered the good cholesterol because it carries cholesterol away from there to other parts of your body, like to the liver, where it's processed and broken down. So it does it does the house cleaning of your arteries. But I guess the key to all this is, although you should know the difference, and I will ask you the difference between the two, the key to all this is you need cholesterol. It's absolutely necessary for you to live, to survive. It's not necessarily a bad thing, although it can, in high enough amounts, cause problems. And I got a little graphic at the bottom of your paper there. I'll show you in a second on here, but you can see it already. that little picture to show you the good guy versus the bad guy. Maybe you can't see it very well, so you'll see it in a second up here.
Why do you say it's only sometimes called H?
No, it's called HDL and LDL. I'm just saying that, but you'll read in the article about how.
But can LDL be associated with good cholesterol?
No. I mean, that's the function of those two things. I'm just saying that we aren't really finding statistics to demonstrate the scare that we had been putting into people about this. For example, people with the lowest cholesterol actually have the greatest chance of dying from heart disease. I know. If you look at the statistics, I mean, you're going to read that, and it's kind of weird. I mean, you would not predict that. People with very low. It's kind of, here's another one. I forgot to mention this one. This is like a whole, I got over so many of these. Salt. Salt's bad for you, right? Shouldn't eat too much salt. Don't put any salt on your food. You already get more salt than you need just by eating your regular food. Turns out, again, most studies that have been done, more than one, big studies show that you know what your greatest chance of a heart attack, greatest chance of heart disease, is not from people who have the highest levels of salt, but from who actually have the lowest intake of salt. I know, it's weird. Now, granted, that doesn't mean you should go piling salt on your food. There are people who obviously need to avoid it. It does lead to high blood pressure, or at least it's associated with it. Whether it leads to it, I don't know. But, it's again, I'm not a doctor. Don't change your eating habits. But I think we're worried about some things that we don't need to be as much as we used to be. Okay, here's that little picture I was telling you about. You can see the good guy is here. He's sweeping up. And the other bad guy, that's the HDL. The LDL is the bad guy. All right. Also on here, just to show you, that's what happens with the plaque building up in the arteries. And, of course, if a piece of that breaks off, goes to your brain, you got a stroke. These are the levels. You could ask your parents about that. They're right there in your notes. See what their levels are. You go, you're concerned about, Mom, I'm concerned. Dad, I'm concerned. You could say very high, high, low, whatever.
What's over what?
What's that?
Like when they say my cholesterol is blah, 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 blah.
Oh, LD, if you're level, they'll tell you. Last time they go to the doctor, they will say it's 157. Then you'll know it's in this range, and it's borderline high. All right? And there's ways naturally to raise and lower your HDL. You want to raise your good cholesterol? You got to drink some more. Get some alcohol in you, Olivia. Stop playing with your hair. What's the matter with you? Some estrogen, Tyler?
Some more?
Some more. He needs a little bit more. Exercise, obviously. But there are natural ways, and then there are artificial ways, like with statins. Okay. Now, right, that's the last one, right. The article I want you to read, it's pretty cool. Make sure you read this. There'll be a question on a test on it. It says, what we now know about cholesterol that we didn't know 10 years ago. And I think it's kind of interesting. All right, so I'll give it to you. And if you read this and you're good,